In our previous episode, we looked at the astonishingly preserved 36,000-year-old Siberian teen whose genome was almost as informative as if you took a swab of your cheek. If you missed that episode, you can find it on our channel. Now we're going to look at the mind-blowing DNA of another young person from the same time and place, but this time focusing on the individual known as Kostenki, 14. You might recognize that name because this individual has been mentioned in various science news articles and social media posts in recent months. The reason why? Because scientists believe the individual is a candidate for belonging to the so-called Cro-Magnons. To use a quote from one of the researchers involved in the discovery, "I think our study makes it clear that the prehistory of modern humans in Europe is far more complex than we thought. So let's take a look at this person's mind-blowing DNA together. Who were the Cro-Magnons? First things first, let's get clear what we mean by Cro-Magnon, because that term doesn't refer to a specific person or group. Instead, it's a somewhat dated term that refers to the first anatomically modern Homo sapiens who entered Europe. This happened roughly around 45,000 to 40,000 years ago, and these people spread throughout the continent. Their arrival coincided with the disappearance of Neanderthals, which some researchers believe was linked to the Cro-Magnons, though we don't know exactly how. The word Cro-Magnon comes from the French and means crooked man. It originally referred to a group of skeletons found in the south of France in 1868, which were believed to be among the oldest remains of modern humans in Europe. Now the term is used more broadly to describe the earliest modern human inhabitants of Europe. As far as we know, Cro-Magnons were just like us. Their skulls and skeletons are virtually indistinguishable from those of modern humans. They had the same body proportions, brain size, and overall anatomy. They probably looked pretty similar to us too. And archaeologists believe that they were skilled hunters who lived off the land and made tools and art. In fact, they left behind many examples of cave paintings, carvings, and jewelry, as well as elaborate burials. It's not quite clear when they arrived in Europe, but based on the available evidence, we estimate that it must have happened sometime before 40,000 years ago. At that time, they were widespread across the continent. Cro-Magnon populations reached eastern Siberia by at least 37,000 years ago, which may have been part of a larger migration into East Asia. Recovering DNA that old, it's hard to recover intact DNA from remains that are more than 30,000 years old. DNA molecules degrade over time due to temperature fluctuations, microbial activity, and other environmental factors. But thanks to advances in next-generation sequencing and contamination control, scientists have managed to get usable fragments of DNA from bones and teeth that are thousands of years old. The remains of Kostenki 14 were discovered in 1987 near the village of Kostenki in western Russia. The bones were so well preserved because they remained buried in permafrost-like conditions. As such, the scientists were able to use a femur bone to reconstruct a high-coverage genome. The genetic profile is one of the oldest and most complete of any early European modern human ever obtained. When the researchers compared the genome of this 36,000-year-old individual to those of modern humans from different regions, they saw that a substantial portion of the ancestry of modern Europeans can be traced back to populations like this one. The DNA shows clear genetic links to modern Europeans and people of Middle Eastern and South Asian descent. In fact, according to one of the researchers, we know that all modern Europeans carry genetic traces of Neanderthals, but before this study, We didn't know what the genetic makeup of early European modern humans was, or whether they interbred with Neanderthals in Europe or only in the Middle East. Neanderthal ancestry. Like all non-African populations today, Cro-Magnons carried segments of Neanderthal DNA, most likely. This came from interbreeding with Neanderthals in the Middle East sometime before 60,000 years ago. However, the fact that Neanderthal ancestry is so uniform across all modern non-African populations, including those that don't live close to where Neanderthals once inhabited Europe or Asia, suggests that the gene flow must have been fairly widespread. In fact, Neanderthals and humans may have interbred multiple times in different places, and they certainly did so on more than one occasion. It looks like the last common ancestor of all Neanderthals and the last common ancestor of all modern humans lived around 600,000 years ago. There is evidence that some of these early humans then moved into Europe and interbred with local Neanderthal populations. Then later, another group moved into Europe and largely replaced the existing population, bringing with them new genetic material. Cro-Magnon 14 had about 2 to 3% Neanderthal ancestry, roughly the same as most modern Europeans. But given that the individual lived 36,000 years ago, this tells us that the interbreeding must have taken place before then. Given the estimated timing of the split between Neanderthals and the lineage leading to modern humans and the amount of Neanderthal ancestry that modern humans have, we estimate that this would have taken place somewhere between 50,000 and 60,000 years ago. Unexpected population structure. One of the most interesting things about the Cro-Magnon genome is that it reveals a surprisingly complex population structure. Contrary to popular belief, the DNA of this 36,000-year-old individual suggests that early Europeans weren't just a single, simple migration of humans out of Africa. Instead, it seems that different populations moved into Europe, mixed with each other, and disappeared over the course of thousands of years. The picture that emerges from the data is a far more dynamic one than anyone expected. It suggests that there was considerable population turnover in Europe, and that far from being a static place, Ice Age Eurasia was a melting pot of different human populations. Some of the ancestry found in the Cro-Magnon individual can be traced back to a population that researchers dubbed the Western Eurasian Ancestral Population, or WEAP. WEAP individuals contributed significantly to the ancestry of later European populations. But at the moment, it's unclear exactly who they were. It's possible that they represented a late surviving lineage of Neanderthals, or that they were a group of archaic humans closely related to Neanderthals. Other genetic material found in the individual points to an East Asian ancestry, which likely came from the same population that contributed to the ancestry of modern-day Siberian populations. Some genetic components of this group later contributed to the gene pool of peoples who eventually migrated to the Americas. In fact, the team thinks that the East Asian component in Cro-Magnon 14 likely represents an earlier migration of humans into Europe, one that we previously knew nothing about. This individual wasn't just a random Cro-Magnon. They were part of a unique group of people with a complex history. Researchers hope that with more discoveries like this one, we'll be able to paint a clearer picture of who the Cro-Magnons were. Links to ancient Siberians and Native Americans. In addition to their European ancestry, the team also found genetic clues pointing to the individual's links to ancient Siberian populations. This individual shared genetic similarities with the 10,000-year-old. Siberian individual whose genome was published last year. And they also shared similarities with a 38,000-year-old boy named Topper from central Siberia. All three individuals belonged to the same genetic cluster, despite living in different regions and separated by 8,000 years. According to senior author K. Proofer, this is surprising because we expected the Siberian and European populations to be genetically more distant given the time and geographic gap. The fact that Kostenki 14 had links to ancient Siberians is interesting because it sheds light on the history of human migration into the Americas. It seems that people related to this individual, along with the people who eventually became the ancestral Pueblones, may have been among the first to move across the Bering Strait and settle in North America. In fact, the team says that this is the earliest genetic evidence for the entry of humans into the Americas, which is at least 3,000 years older than previously thought. Phenotypic clues. Ancient DNA can tell us more than just ancestry. It can also reveal clues about someone's appearance and health. Unfortunately, reconstructions are not perfect. But based on what scientists currently know, the team believes that Cro-Magnons from this period likely had light to intermediate skin tones, dark hair, and possibly lighter eye colors. In general, we know that early modern humans living in southern Europe had darker skin than contemporary humans from northern Europe. But we also know that skin color evolved rapidly in response to different environmental pressures. So it's unlikely that everyone in Europe had the same skin tone. Some individuals from the same population can share certain genetic variants that affect the color of their skin, hair, and eyes, while others may not. This individual, for example, carried alleles linked to lighter skin and dark hair, but also an allele linked to lighter eyes. Their genome also contained alleles that may have helped them adapt to colder climates. For example, they carried an allele that helps regulate body temperature, which would have been useful for dealing with the cold. They also carried an allele associated with fat metabolism, which may have helped them stay warm and nourished during the winter months. And they carried an allele linked to immune responses, which may have helped them fight off pathogens that circulated in Ice Age Europe. So why is this DNA mind-blowing? So why is the DNA of this individual and others like them so exciting? Well, it's because it challenges older, more simplistic narratives about human history. Just a few decades ago, many assumed that early Europeans were a single uniform population that simply spread across the continent. But that's far from what the evidence shows. Instead, ancient DNA has revealed a far more dynamic past, one marked by multiple waves of migration, genetic bottlenecks, and possibly interactions with now extinct groups. In the words of one of the researchers, I think our study makes it clear that the prehistory of modern humans in Europe is far more complex than we thought. But perhaps the most exciting thing about this discovery is that it shows us that even the most entrenched aspects of our identity are constantly evolving. The Cro-Magnons were an incredibly diverse group of people, and their story is far from over. What we still don't know, despite the incredible revelations of the past decade, many questions remain open. For example, we still don't know exactly what the relationship was between Cro-Magnons and slightly earlier modern humans, like those found in the Levant or Central Asia. We also don't know if Cro-Magnon groups across Europe differed genetically as much as their archaeological cultures suggest. Finally, we still want to learn more about the specific traits that helped Cro-Magnons survive ice, age conditions, and how those traits continue to shape modern human biology. Hopefully, future discoveries will shed light on these and other mysteries. In the meantime, we can marvel at the incredible story that ancient DNA has already revealed. New discoveries are being made all the time, and you won't want to miss a single one. So make sure to subscribe to our channel for more updates. Thank you for watching.